Okay, now I'm going to turn this over to Seth Vidania, who is the city's climate and energy manager, who's going to tell you a little bit about the All In Week. And after that, Julie Johnson will introduce our speakers and start our evening's event. Again, thank you so much for coming. Okay, Seth Vidania.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Betsy, for that intro. I'm Seth Vidania. I am helping the City of Bellingham community and city government demonstrate leadership in climate action. I work as the climate and energy manager for the City of Bellingham. We're really excited to have the Multi-Faith Network for Climate Justice host this event today as part of, as Julie mentioned, the city's second annual All-In for Climate Action Week. This week is a celebration of all the knowledge, progress, and resources that our community has to offer when looking for solutions to address global climate change at our local level. Our awesome Bellingham community has put together a great list of events for this week, and you can find a full listing, including recordings, in case you missed some of the events out there, and learn about steps that you can take to reduce your personal impact by visiting this website, www.cob.org/all-in. You could probably just Google City of Bellingham All-In Climate, and it'll give you the same results. But thanks for a little time here, and look forward to the event.
Thank you, Seth.
Julie, I'll pass it back to you.
Okay, thank you. So it's my pleasure to introduce tonight's speakers to you. In a moment, you'll hear from Jillian Froby, Community Interfaith Minister and Chaplain, who will start us off with an invitation and also read the acknowledgement of the Salish coastlands. She'll be followed by 3 speakers who will share their stories with us. Satpal Sidhu, Guru Nanuk Gursuk Gurdwara, the Reverend Rachel Weasley, Community of Hope Church, and Taliesin Session Tyndall of Red Cedar Zen Buddhist Community. They'll be speaking one after the other without a pause. And when they've finished, we'll take a minute to get into small groups where anyone who wants to will have an opportunity to share. And then we'll come back together, and the Reverend Seth Thomas from St. James Presbyterian Church will offer a summary of what has been shared and also a closing blessing. So I'm going to turn it over to Jillian now. You're muted.
Okay, now? Okay, take 2. So I wanted to just thank you, Julie and Betsy, for all your leadership and guidance and inspiration in bringing forward MNCJ in our community, and also for the honor of doing a welcoming this evening. It's customary in our community to begin with a land acknowledgement out of respect for our local Indigenous community. Any ritual may easily become a habit or a routine. So when I read these particular words used in the Multi-Faith Network events, I invite each of us to truly open our hearts to the gratitude and to the grief inherent in this long overdue acknowledgement. And wherever you are now sitting, I ask you to feel your own rooted connection with place, with all beings, and with the wisdom our Indigenous neighbors and many of our ancestors lived and breathed, that the earth is filled with speaking, thinking, feeling entities as worthy and as valuable as we are. Trees and rocks and rivers really do have things to say to us. So please join me in acknowledging that this land where we all reside is the traditional territory of the Lummi and Nooksack peoples. Their presence is imbued in these mountains, valleys, waterways, and shorelines. May we nurture our relationship with our Coast Salish neighbors and our shared responsibilities to their homelands where we mutually abide. So now I'd like each of us to turn our attention to become aware of and honor our breath. The importance of our breath perhaps has never been more globally clear than in our world today. As we navigate COVID-19, the West Coast fires, and the smoke that recently penetrated our atmosphere, each of us may be aware of appreciating our breath even more, and maybe even wondering what it would feel like to have that breath taken away. This time is asking us, perhaps even requiring us, to pay attention to the pain in the iconic message, "I can't breathe," while simultaneously attending to daily glimpses of beauty that fill us with awe and that take our breath away. Although we're all on screens now and not able to fully experience the embodied presence of this gathered community, I invite you to turn your attention to your own breath, to embrace the gift of this breath, knowing that very little carbon, oxygen, or nitrogen is lost to outer space, so that every breath you take and every breath I take is composed of atoms that have been here for a long, long time. Please join me in experiencing your own breath as together we invoke a blessing. May we breathe in the truth of our own calling related to climate and social justice. And may we breathe out gratitude for all the places and all the species that we want to honor and protect. May we breathe in the truth of our grief and fears, vulnerabilities and disappearances in our touchable and time-bound world. And may we breathe out the mystery of love's promise in the face of that loss. May our breath help us to feel the truth of our interconnectedness tonight, with each other in community and with all forms of life on this precious planet. I'd like to end with a poem by Wendell Berry entitled "The Real Work." It may be that when we no longer know what to do, we have come to our real work. And that when we no longer know which way to go, we have come to our real journey. The mind that is not baffled is not employed. The impeded stream is the one that sings. So may we honor our impediments while singing our commitment to justice. May it be so. So I now hand the virtual microphone to you, Satpal. Thank you.
Hi. Good evening. Can you guys hear me? Hey. Oh, good evening. Thanks to all the organizers and to Betsy for our time and efforts to communicate with all the speakers, all the emails, and keeping us all queued up for this day. And I am honored to be on this panel of especially important topic, not only in our lives, but for our kids and grandkids' lives. Let me start with this, that we are not born racist. Racism is a learned behavior. We must discriminate. We must eliminate discrimination from the minds and thoughts of people. We must direct our protests against the prejudice, bigotry, and the unfair laws, not against people, just they may happen to be white. It's not the color of skin, but dark thoughts against fellow humans is what is deplorable. America may have matured in terms of laws, but our systemic racism still germinates in the minds of many Americans. Our conscience has to rise right from our parents to our society, to our schools, to our kids. The same is true of climate change and environmental consciousness. We may have many laws and stringent penalties, but change of hearts and minds about the health
Except Paul, you froze. Does somebody have his phone number? Call him and let him know. Betsy, if you're trying to talk, you're muted.
Thank you. I'm gonna give him a call. I don't know what happened. Steve,
He just,
pardon me? That'd be fine. Steve, I can't see you, but
Yeah, I'm here.
I'm wondering if it's a problem with just that call. Oh, he just sent a message. Just let me check. I lost my internet, he says.
yeah.
So perhaps we could just move on to Rachel, and then when wait a minute, when Seth Paul comes on, we can, you guys all good with that?
So it might help if everybody turns their video off when the speakers come on.
Wait, Deb, what do you mean by turning our videos off? We want to be able to see the speaker.
No, the speaker leaves their video on, so you.
Well, Betsy, should I go ahead and whenever?
Yes. Seth Paul just called. He said he lost his internet. He's going to work on his router and try to get back in. So why don't you, Rachel, move forward? We'll just move forward.
Okay, hello everyone. I'm honored to be sharing with you today. My name is Rachel Weasley. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a Christian community organizer, currently working on starting up a new queer activist church in Bellingham. And I'd like to open with a song I wrote as a contemplative practice for activists. It's actually on YouTube if you want to listen to it again later. And it might not be obvious why it's for activists. The words are, "Oh, wild tenderness of my body, love what you love." But there are a couple reasons I consider this song to be pretty radical. So first, our society privileges and honors some types of bodies above others. And so by celebrating all bodies, including trans, neurodiverse, aging, fat, disabled, brown, female bodies, we are proclaiming a new set of values, one that would radically transform our world order. And second, in my own activism, I've noticed that the urgency of injustice tempts me to deny the needs of my body and overwork, courting burnout. So listening to my body helps me slow down, keep my work sustainable, and motivate me not by my anxiety, but by my joy. Then third, I think it's important for our work of justice to embody the values of the world we're trying to build. So we're not only against white supremacy, we're for a world where our bodies are all safe to be wild, to be tender, to be free. And it's important to imagine, envision that world, to sing about that world. So today we'll be singing together virtually, which means you can hear me, but not each other. As we sing together anyway, I invite you to attend to the blending of your voice with mine and to claim these other voices that are joining us, even if we can't hear them. May they remind us of all the people around the world who are joining with us in this work of justice. So this song is just a single phrase that I'll sing many times, and I invite you to join in whenever you feel ready. Even though there are screens involved, your breath and your voice are with you in person. So I invite you, as Jillian invited us earlier, to be embodied in place. Oh, wild tenderness of my body, love what you love. Oh, wild tenderness of my body, love what you love. Oh, wild tenderness of my body, love what you love. Oh, wild tenderness of my body, love what you love. Oh, wild tenderness of my body, love what you love. Oh, wild tenderness of my body, love what you love. Oh, wild tenderness of my body, love what you love. Okay, so I wrote a lot of drafts of this, and the truth is I just have way too much to say on the intersection of racial and climate justice. So I'll just tell you directly what I think about it. Racial and climate justice are both based on an ideology of domination. That in a relationship, it is acceptable for one party to own, to extract from, to possess, to control, to profit from the other. I find these relationships of domination all around me, and they are not where I sense the presence of the divine. So the story that keeps coming back to me as I reflect on this topic is a time when I was marching with hotel workers in Chicago, and they were on strike. So I was a female, white, Christian seminary student, but I was marching with people of many genders, nationalities, religions, languages, ages, roles in the strike, and walks of life. A capitalist corporation was telling us that the hotel workers didn't deserve a living wage or decent health care or safe working conditions. So we filled the streets and blocked traffic to say, yes, they do. As we marched towards the hotel, we turned a corner and I glanced around behind me to look. I saw the crowd spilling around the bend, filling the street, and I got shivers. Because right then I knew I am in the presence of God. This image of collective power, of cooperation across lines of difference, remains one of my principal images of the holy. It is an example of power together, against which I measure too many experiences in my life of power over. Currently, I'm part of a group of Mennonites working to dismantle the doctrine of discovery, which is the theological, legal, political framework that allowed Christians to feel good about subjugating the Americas and committing genocide. The legacies of this doctrine are still lurking in our tradition, and it is the sacred work of those of us who are Christian to dismantle that legacy. So the coalition is doing legal work, we're doing education, and currently we're writing a reparations booklet to assist settler descendants in working for repair. And one of the biggest ways this work has changed me is teaching me that I have unwittingly had a relationship of domination with the land. As a group, our committee read Native, Belonging, Identity, and Rediscovering God by Kristen B. Curtis, a Christian Potawatomi author. And she writes about belonging to the land, thanking the land, blessing the land. She writes about the land as a someone, not a what. And that has been changing my life. It's changing my relationship with the land. Allowing ourselves to be transformed by our relationship with others is one of the ways we practice power together. I'm going to close in song, and it's another song I've written as a contemplative practice for activists. It's about anger. And the words are, how can our anger give life? Anger give life. It's inspired by an article by Audre Lorde called On the Uses of Anger, Women Responding to Racism. In my life, anger has been a form of love. It has been a message from God teaching me self-respect. It has looked like a crowd of people in the streets saying our bodies matter. It has looked like Indigenous writers breaking open my understanding of who the land is. It has looked like my own courage reading those words and wrestling with the pain of facing my own heritage. And I'm angry that systems of domination have co-opted so many aspects of my identity, weaponizing my race, weaponizing my religion. I'm angry because I have seen the beauty of power together. I have experienced God in cooperatives, in community singing, in groups of misfits, in grassroots organizing, in dance. These glimpses of the divine, these tastes of liberation are more than enough to get me out of bed every morning. Because in a space where who I am is valued and celebrated, I can feel that in my very bones. So my anger has been a guide for me. It alerts me, warns me about power over. Anger is honest fuel we can burn for the work of building a world of beauty. It is the defiant no of the crowd of striking workers crying out against the CEO. But it is also the defiant this instead of the crowd of striking workers crying out to one another, giving form to a better world. I find God in that crowd, and I hope to find you in the crowd with me. So I invite you to join with me in the song. The words are, how can our anger give life? Anger give life. life. Anger give life. How can our anger give life? Anger give life. 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 Can our anger give life? Anger give Can our anger give life? Anger give life. Can our anger give life? Anger give life. Can our anger give life? Anger give life. How can our anger give life? Anger give life. Thank you. And now I'll pass the time off to Seishin, unless maybe we're going to hear from Satpal now.
Am I going next, or is it Satpal?
If, no, you are, Seishin.
Okay. To start off, something that came up for me tonight that I'd like to offer to the group is if we could all just sit for a moment and why did each of us choose to come here tonight? What brought us to this place? For me, that always remains one of the most vivid questions in everything we do in activism elsewhere in life is, what is the ground that brings us to live? What is the energy that brings us to devote our lives to change, to things that aren't easy, to things that require us to learn? What is the love? Can we touch an interactive? Like much of the activism I've done in my life has been grounded on other energies. And I think that's one of the beauties of our collective faith practices is if they can bring us back to that space of love, then we can act from those. I think that's valuable, beautiful. And I think that's so important because to me, that's what faith traditions can offer is, I believe our environmental crisis is rooted in a spiritual crisis, just like I believe our racial crisis and all of our societal ones are rooted in a deeply spiritual illness that we as a people are so addicted to individualism, to materialism, to consumerism, to these perspectives and lifestyles that are fundamentally unsustainable and cruel. And I think that's where these traditions can offer something, is they offer an alternative if we can find them. They offer another way to relate to one another, another way to relate to the land, to the place, to each other, to other people, that is rooted in love, that is rooted in deep understanding. And that's a hard place for all of us to come to in life, because it's so different than the way many of us were raised. And like, I was raised in a alternative, politically minded hippie household, right? But I spent a chunk of time as a self-centered, hedonistic vagabond, traveling for my own enjoyment. And it took a lot of pain for me to wake up that there was more to the world than simply myself and my own desires. And most significantly, my experience at Standing Rock is what drove me to find the inspiration to devote myself to change, to growth. And so much happened in that place. So much happened those years ago in North Dakota. And something that continues to inspire me then was that the Lakota elders always reminded us that more than about confronting the police, our activity there was about prayer. And that's something that's always inspired my activism, that they so deeply held that it wasn't about getting arrested or whatever. It was about living a life of prayer, living a life that honors the sacred, that honors something divine in this land, in the world. And one elder in particular would often say, if you don't go to bed tired, you didn't pray hard enough. And I think that's important too, that we relate sometimes to spiritual practice, to love, to religion as this kind of our thoughts and prayers mentality that's cut off from action. But how do we find the intersection between faith and activism, between the spirit and activity, between the absolute and the relative, as we say in the Buddhist tradition? I often think back to a conversation I had in those days after a failed direct action that had us end up being basically rounded up like cattle by the police. And I went back to one of the camps and I sat by one of the fires, and there was a Lakota elder who, Sidney Ramsey's Jr., and he would often say that in this life you have one choice. You can do the right thing or you can do the wrong thing. And I asked him, so what's the right thing for me to do? And he said, I cannot tell you that. No one can. You must look deep inside and question yourself. And we talked about other things and went back and forth. And finally he asked me again, of what are you afraid? Have you looked deep inside yet? And I had to answer, no, I had not looked deep inside. I did not know why I'd come to that place. I did not know what I was fighting for. I did not know who I was. I did not know what was important. And I think that's so common in our culture, that our American culture holds nothing as sacred. We worship money, but we do not hold money as sacred. It's a means to itself. It is not itself special. And that's the conversation, that's the question that drew me to formal Buddhist practice, to starting to go on meditation retreats, to sitting in silence, was that question, have you looked deep inside yet? And that realization that I hadn't, and that draw I had to somehow to find a way to look deep inside, to find a way to connect with the sacred, to find a way to honor, to find a way to pray in my own way. And it transformed my life as I started to find religion. It transformed the way I lived. It made me rethink my life choices in the big ways and in the little ways that I feel like we have to so deeply change our lives. We have to find ways of being with each other, working, that are sustainable. And in the get-go, after Standing Rock, I moved to I tried to live off the grid pretty much. And I felt like that was the solution, that I have to like not be a part of the problem. I have to not consume. But that ended up feeling self-serving too. And I feel like that's kind of this dichotomy where we can either be so involved in the system that we become the problem, or we can try and bypass the system and escape. But that doesn't really offer a solution. And that's where I feel like our spiritual practices call us to be engaged in the world, to live in society, and to find a different way of living within society. And that's something the Buddhist tradition often talks about, is how do we live within the world and help? That we can't just escape. There's nowhere else but this. And that to have that influence our activism, I feel like it's important to have that kind of understanding be the ground spring, that much of my activism can flow from a place of confusion, of anger. And those were some of those key emotions for me then, was that anger and that confusion of being so mad at humanity and being so uncertain what my place in it is. And that's where I feel like the faith traditions can help guide us, can guide us through that uncertainty, guide us through that anger. There is no getting rid of it. Those are valid emotions that we should all experience in these strange times. But how do we live with those? How do we use them to influence our practices? And that's what brought me back into society. Like, I started taking my prereqs for nursing school that'll start next year. I settled down in Bellingham and stopped traveling. I decided to live with a bicycle instead of a car. I decided to do these small things to figure out, like, what is a sustainable lifestyle. All those things I feel like are very important as we find a lifestyle that is rooted in love. And today we live in such a time of uncertainty, and for me, the faith tradition can inspire that of how do we relate to not knowing when there's so much uncertainty in the world, and when we don't know what's going on, how do we still act? And that's always been one of my confusions in activism, is there are no answers. There is no solving the world problem we live in. There is no fix-it solution, right? You know, I'm 25 years old. I will hopefully live a long time to see who knows what will happen. And there is no easy answer. And that's where, for me, I turn to my faith tradition of how do I live from a place of not knowing? How do I live from a place of acceptance where I am not in control? I do not have the answers, but I keep trying, I keep acting, I keep responding, even though I don't know what will come. We do not know the consequences of our actions, and yet we continue to respond and we continue to live. And that's where I feel like prayer comes in. That prayer to me is that deep intention that I am not in control. I do not know what will happen, but I maintain that intention. I maintain that power within me to bring about something. And that's what I have tried to infuse into my activism, is that deep intention that I am not in control, but I still try. I still act. And I'm not as explicitly politically active as I used to be, truth be told. I don't go to as many rallies as I used to be. My life has become more involved in my medical studies that have, for the health and safety of the people I care for, I can't be as frontline as I used to be right now. But I think that's okay, because sometimes activism gets pulled into this direction of frontline activism, which is super important. We need frontline activists. We need rallies. We need protests. We need marches and occupation camps. And at the same time, I think back to those Lakota elders who were so firm that the purpose of why they had called so many thousands of people to those camps was not to confront the police, was not to be arrested, was not to make some statement like that. It was to pray. It was to sing and to dance together around the fire and around the burial sites. And I wonder about that to this day, of what of our activism is simply our practices, are our faith traditions, is how much of my activism is my involvement in this tradition, that as we come together in these various faith traditions in the network, we are making this viable change to something so important to our society. We live in a society that is highly religious. And I think an important change in that is going to be having our religious institutions and our spiritual practices themselves become conscious of climate change, become conscious of systemic oppression, and grapple with that, come to terms with that, and be a part of the solution. Yeah, and so yeah, sometimes I'm depressed and sometimes I'm anxious because I am deeply afraid of the future as a young person, as a queer person. I am terrified of what is coming. I do not know what my life has in hold for me. I am not in control of anything. And yet here I am alive, and I am faced with the unanswerable question of how to live. And life continues to draw me back to spiritual practice and to faith. And I pass off to Paul, or?
Yes. Yes, I'm here.
You're here. Good. Thank you.
Sorry about that, guys. This is new age, new technology. I mean, it has wonders, but if it fails, we just become helpless. So I don't know how far did you guys hear me. Maybe should I start from the beginning, or what do you guys think?
I would love you to start from the beginning.
Okay. Okay, I'll just do that. I'll be a little short and quick. Okay. Well, good evening, and thanks for organizing this thing. So this is how I start: is that we are not born racist. Racism is a learned behavior. We must eliminate discrimination from the minds and thoughts of collective protest against the prejudice, bigotry, and unfair laws, not against people just because they happen to be white. It's not the color of skin, dark thoughts against fellow human beings, which is deplorable. America may have matured in terms of laws, but our systemic racism still germinates in minds of many Americans. Our conscience has to rise right from the birth of the child, from the parents, society, schools, the whole society. Our conscience has to rise. Now, the same is true of the climate change and environmental consciousness. We may have laws and stringent penalties, but change of hearts and minds about the health of our planet are still lagging in our understanding that our planet is fragile. It needs tender loving care. And that's what nature does to all its creation. It has tender loving care for everybody. And we have to respond in kind. We have been taught directly or indirectly that bounty of nature is human-centric. Go ask a mountain lion, you are here to serve me. Go ask a cobra, you are here to serve me, and you will know pretty quickly who's in charge. So, I mean, all that is available on the planet is for humans to use, is not for humans to exploit and use it for their sole benefits. That's not really true. Now, if you look at a grasshopper very carefully, now this is the story I learned in my faith and I'm sharing with you. You look at a grasshopper very carefully. Source of creation has paid as much attention to this grasshopper as to a human. The source of creation has given equal attention to the grasshopper or an ant. Who are you to think an ant is a lowly creature? She is expendable. And you are some kind of super creature? Why are you making this judgment while the source of creation has not made that judgment? You know, if all the earthworms disappear, all life on planet will finish in next 24 to 36 months. If all the birds and insects disappear, flora and fauna, including humans, may not survive for more than a couple of years. But if humans disappear, this planet will flourish. We know that Chernobyl, nature has come back, nature is flourishing, but humans can't be there still. Like our own existence is in our own hands, and the human race is in peril because of their senseless, selfish actions. Yes, all the nature's bounty is available for humans to use, but carefully and with respect, coexist with the rest of the creation. You know, when you see Lamination, other people, other cultures, they say prayers before going fishing. They say prayers to the water. They say prayers to the trees, because that is really living or coexisting with respect and with care. That's where those things come from. They're not just made up stuff. This is what existed before. Now let me come back to the racism and its connection with climate change. Here is another story. Now, the movement of Black Lives Matter is not new. President Lincoln used this slogan at the highest level in United States, at Black Lives Matter. He was the first person, he was the first commander-in-chief to take a knee and risk sacrifice of 800,000 white Americans for this cause, because it was so important. President Lincoln issued Emancipation Proclamation on January 1, 1863, as the nation approached its third year of bloody civil war. And the proclamation declared that all persons held as slaves within the rebellious states are and henceforward shall be free. Just a couple of years ago, Colin Kaepernick was criticized for taking the knee today. And now all Major League sports players, owners are sporting Black Lives Matter. And people are openly wearing symbols of Black Lives Matter in public and professional lives. We must build upon this movement. The movement for continued racial reforms need to be firm, robust, and peaceful. A global wave of protests demanding an end to the racist policing have taken place in towns and cities all across the world. And there is a mounting evidence that brown, Black, and the Native communities have also been disproportionately impacted by the coronavirus pandemic. Increasingly, the experts and protesters have identified racial justice as the common denominator in police violence, as well as environmental and health inequalities linked to the poor COVID-19 outcomes. On the streets, what started as Black Lives Matter protests have morphed into a moment for racial justice amid growing recognition that systemic racism denies people of color equal access to economic, social, environmental, and climate justice, as well as health equity, political power, civil rights, and human rights. Disproportionate rates of pandemic or COVID infections, hospitalizations, and deaths are linked to the lingering and persistent health, social, economic, and environmental inequalities facing Black Americans and other people of color communities. Such conditions are rooted in oppression, discrimination, medical apartheid, and structural racism. In the US and UK, research has found that people of color suffer more air pollution, which is linked to the multiple respiratory and cardiovascular conditions, significantly increase the risk of death from coronavirus. Racism is built into America's DNA. Since 1619, Black Americans have had to endure this violent and oppressive system. And in 2020, COVID-19 pandemic has exposed our nation's racial divide. A statement made by Robert Bullard, he's a professor of economic policy at Texas Southern University, and he's also chair of National Black Environmental Justice Network, which has pledged to create a roadmap for broad environmental justice agenda viewed through a racial justice lens. Environmental racism kills. Air pollution and rollbacks to environmental protections and regulations makes it hard for Black and brown community residents to breathe. Globally, the environmental and climate movement has long faced criticism of failing to understand the crucial role of racial justice in terms both of impact and the solutions. In the United States, most environmental groups or civil rights groups have not included in their agenda the facts that there is a disproportionate dumping of toxic waste in Black and Hispanic neighborhoods. Income inequalities and job insecurity also plays a big part. Black people in UK are less affluent than other ethnic groups and less likely to be able to spare time for meeting, protest, lobbying, and all other actions they could take for their own benefit. In recent weeks, the protest movement is really helping. People are more open to listen. It made people realize the US is not the only country with systemic problems of racism. We need a moment to really think how we relate to one another. The toxic system is something that we all have to live with. As protesters and activists demand world leaders also connect the dots, and there is a clear link between racial justice and climate justice. A UK-based Black Lives Matter organization is saying, the white people care about maintaining a habitable planet. You need to be actively anti-racist also. You need to understand that our inequality crisis is intertwined with the climate crisis. If we do not work on both of these, we will succeed at neither. In the last 4 years, since US backtracked from communities forward, as US backtracked from commitments towards climate change made at Paris Peace Accord and subsequently withdrawing, has been devastating global efforts to combat climate change impacts. This has led many other countries to become complacent because of the resources which US could have provided. Other countries have dwindled significantly. The climate change issue demands a worldwide response to help safeguard the earth for future generations, and US has chosen to walk away. Our president, with full knowledge and scientific evidence, is playing politics with the climate crisis, the most defining issue of our times. The stakes could not be higher, as this issue alone should be at the center of our 2020 elections. This election will be a referendum on the future of our democratic institutions, on racial justice, on the Supreme Court, and so much more. As the carbon emissions continue, a substantial climate change is unavoidable. Most impacted communities will also be most vulnerable. Instead of helping lead this discussion, the White House prefers roll back environmental protections to placate the fossil fuel industry. My message to you is, please wear a mask, register more people to vote, vote early, because your kids and grandkids' future depends on it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Satpal.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel, and thank you, Seishin. We're going to go now. I think we're going to go now. If the Zoom universe is with us, I think we're going to go into small groups now, just for about 10 or 12 minutes, so that anyone who would like to can have an opportunity to share from their own experience. Steve, I'm turning it over to you. You got us in there.
Okay. Okay, we're going into 7 breakout rooms, and we'll come back at, I was told at 7:40. Is that still?
Why don't we make it around 7:45, since the evening got a little bit mixed up. Is that okay with you, Julie?
Yes.
At 7:45, then we'll give Reverend Thomas about 15 minutes, 10, 15 minutes to wrap it up.
Yes. And could I just say, these groups aren't facilitated, and so anybody can share, and we ask that you just be mindful about the time, and everybody who wants to share. So with that, I turn it over to Steve.
Okay, here we go.
Okay.
So you should all have invitations to join a room, and we ask you to accept.
Actually, I don't have one. I don't think, does anybody else have one? No, none of us have one.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
let's see.
You know, no worries, Steve. If we can't make a breakout room session happen,
Well,
we can always share here.
We can be the breakout.
It said everybody got invitations, but oops.
Perils of Zoom.
I have to wait for the first rooms to close, which is going to be 37 more seconds.
Okay.
And we can try them again. Okay, so here we go. It says open all rooms. All participants have been invited to join breakout rooms. Anybody get such an invitation?
No.
Why
Go
not?
ahead.
Could be
So
something
Julie,
in
do you
the-
want to go with the idea of having people share in large groups?
We're gonna stay together here, and we're gonna just open the space and invite anyone who wants.
Yeah, that's good.
We have a volunteer, or Betsy.
I just got volunteered. I'll share a story. I'll start us out. I'll keep it short because we have a bunch of people and there are many stories. I'll share my story of how I became a climate activist. And it's a road you start down and you don't know at least for me, I started down this path and I didn't, maybe we should mute people because I'm hearing a lot of feedback. I didn't realize I was a climate activist when I took this step. It's only when you start down the path and then you realize you've not taken other roads, like they say, the road less traveled. And then you're down the path quite a ways and you realize you've made not one step, but 100, and you've made not one decision, but 1,000. But this was the moment I took my first step. And I have to say it was framed by having grown up in a family that was big on outdoors. My grandmother and grandfather went on a backpack canoe trip in 1909 to northern Canada for their honeymoon. So that's the kind of family I grew up in. And so anyway, the moment it became clear to me that I needed to do something more than be a great outdoors person who loved backpacking and hiking was the day I graduated from college. And I went to college in Ohio, Case Western Reserve University, which is in Cleveland. And on my graduation day, as I was processing to get my diploma, the river 6 miles to my west, Cuyahoga River, caught on fire. And that moment, for any of you who are my age, that made the headline news. That was the moment that America woke up and decided we needed to start taking clean water and clean air seriously. And believe it or not, it was what sparked, that fire sparked the fuel that led to the passage of the Clean Water Act 2 years ago and the creation of the Environmental Protection Agency. That's how old I am. What that moment did for me personally was, that was the weekend that I signed up to join the Sierra Club. And I have been an active member ever since. That was the first step on my road to environmental activism. So I've talked too long, and I'm going to let someone else take a turn.
Thank you, Betsy.
Welcome.
Okay, we're waiting.
Maybe I should call on people. What do you think? Really put them on the spot. Seth, how did you get the job you got? Seth Vidania. You must have had some environmental background.
Yeah, I worked at Western Washington University as a sustainability director there for just about 14 years. And I got that job because I was really energized by attending university, and boy, when I was there, my main subject of focus was activism, and the studying was kind of a side thing that I did. But what really inspired me was getting out there and working with communities for peace, justice, and environmental integrity. And I thought, boy, I want to keep doing that work, but I also need to buy oatmeal. So I need to find a job that'll allow me to do both those things at the same time. And so as I was a master's student, I proposed to one of the vice presidents at Western Washington University, that they start a sustainability position. And the vice president said, "That's great. You've got a year to prove yourself, and you got to roll up your sleeves." And so I spent a year being a master's student and working full time, trying to build up our sustainability office. And 15 years later, I'm here. So that's my short story.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah. So you created a career. You did it on that's.
Yeah, a lot of that was nice timing. I happened to be around people who were motivated and were excited to move in that direction. So that's a big chunk of it.
Anyone else want to share? Us, Bob. There you go, Bob Reisenberg.
Hi, Seth. Seth and I did a little work together when he was up at Western, and I haven't seen him for a while. Anyway, I'll try to keep this brief because I could go on for a long time. I grew up on a farm in southwestern Ohio, outside of Cincinnati, where if you couldn't raise it and sell it for a profit, you killed it one way or the other by spraying it or shooting it or taking it to the stockyards or something. So anyway, that's how I grew up, but I loved the outdoors. And my favorite part was going out to find the cows out in the woods. I always loved that part more than anything else. Wound up with the Indian Health Service, living on Indian reservations for 11 years, the Dakotas and Montana. And that was a transformative experience for me, not because I immersed myself in the culture, but because I watched the folks who were immersed in the culture and learned a lot from them. So that opened my eyes to a new way of looking at a term I didn't even recognize at the time, ecosystems, and that it wasn't all about profit. So I can just say that was a transformative period of my life that led me to spend the next, what would it be, at least 40 years, as I call it, pushing the rock up the hill on environmental issues and taking the path of trying to do it through education. So Seth is well familiar with that about me. So that's sort of my short story. I could go on, but I'll try to stop.
Thank you, Bob. That's a great story. Anyone else want to share? We have time for maybe one more. David.
Yeah, I can piggyback on this. There's an education theme happening here. Dave Ketter, I'm with MNCJ as well. And wow, it's going to go way back too. You know, I knew by the time I was 10 or 12 that I would be working in the environmental field. And it's because I grew up in a rural area as well, not on a farm, but in a town right across the street from a river, which became a really important part of who I am. I spent a lot of time at that river in my junior high age, which was socially pretty rough for me. So it was my place of solace and contemplation. And when I go home now, you know, most of my family lives 30 miles away from that river. I still go see the river and connect with it. And it feels like I'm not seeing a family member if I don't. And it's just been, it just kind of bubbled up in me early on in my life that I knew I would devote myself and my career towards somehow supporting and helping the planet. I have not been a traditional activist in the 60s and 70s kind of way. My activism has been through education, where I brought as much environmental and sustainability education as I could to my classrooms. I'm still doing that, working at the state level on some small committees to get environmental ed, and even locally. Excited to have just applied for a small position coordinating an awesome little project around supporting kids with online learning, that struggling 10%, doing that in the morning, and then connecting them with environmental ed organizations in the afternoon and getting them outdoors. And you know, this is my form of activism late in life, continuing to nurture connection to nature early with kids, and so that informs, you know, who they are, how they see the world, and how they relate to each other and the planet as they go forth. Well, thanks.
Thank you so much, David. Julie, I think it's time to turn this over to
Seth.
Reverend Travis.
Right.
Is that my cue, Julie?
That's your cue.
All right, thank you. Well, gosh, it's a real honor to get to see your faces this evening and hear your stories, and the kind of weave this thread that has been spoken of over this last hour or so as we've gathered. So before I do my best to try to summarize and synthesize what I think I'm hearing, I just want to pause. And I want to return to what Jillian started us with, which was just return to our breath. So I invite you to, as we've heard stories shared, we have a shared breath in this time together here. So I invite you to receive that breath as you breathe it in and to exhale. And once more, receive that breath of our shared story. And exhale your part, your breath in it. We share these stories with each other, and they are a compilation of our lives that both speak to a great sense of diversity and difference, and yet also quite a shared tradition and longing and love for creation and the flourishing of all creatures here on earth. Again, I'll introduce myself and then I'll kind of begin some of my thoughts. I'm Seth Thomas. I serve as pastor of St. James Presbyterian Church in the Fairhaven neighborhood on the South Hill. And our congregation is honored to be a part of this multi-faith network for climate justice and to help encourage and support the work that all of our communities are doing on behalf of the climate in shared concert together. I'm humbled to get to try to say anything about what my colleagues have spoken about already, because their words speak for themselves and their stories are rich with great meaning and great opportunity for us to learn and listen. And so the hope, though, is to draw us towards some kind of common thread here. One of the pieces with us beginning, Jillian, again, thank you, beginning with our breath, is that it roots us in our shared bodies as well. We share a connection with each other, not only in how we breathe, but how we're impacted by the world around us and impacted by each other as we see each other's faces, even through this strange medium of webcams and living rooms and back offices, etc. We are sharing this common space of our place, which is Bellingham, Whatcom County, and the land that we've acknowledged that was never ours to begin with and never even is something we can claim to possess or hold. It all belongs to the Creator. And so we stand upon that as one people and yet diverse in that. A couple of things that I hear as I've listened tonight are the prompt of us wanting to find stories to speak around racism and climate justice. I hear a tension between what is described as, some of us have described as a toxic story. There are toxic stories that have led us to the desire for activism and action in our world. There are toxic stories that make us quite uncomfortable with what we see. They make us despair at what we possibly could see in the future. They make us long for something to have been done differently in the past. And so we hold the toxic story. And yet I also hear held in tension with that, this hope for us collectively beginning to tell a different story. And what would it be like for us to gather like we are and both name what has been so broken and so harmful, and yet also hold out the hope that there is the possibility that we could begin to tell something different. I think that the beginning of this multi-faith network for climate justice, it began with that sort of an energy, where we wanted to come together and say, what is a story that we could collectively tell as the community of Whatcom County that speaks a better word for the future? And that doesn't speak of our division, but actually speaks of our collective action and belonging to one another and to the land that we occupy. We have an opportunity here to listen to one another, to hear each individual's story, which unfortunately, for the constraints of our time tonight, we don't have a chance to do that. But if we were able to, we would begin to hear this kind of mosaic start to come together, this amalgamation of ideas that are speaking towards something that we commonly share with one another. Regardless of our faith traditions, regardless of our stage and place in life, we share so much with one another. And I think many of us have highlighted already tonight the great sense of division and in a sense pulling apart that we're experiencing as a nation, and that we even as experience as individuals right now, as we are so pulled apart from our normal routines amidst this pandemic. There's so much that wants to drive us into that desperate and pulled apart state. And yet there are moments like this when we have an opportunity to witness that that is not the only way that the story gets told. Another strong image that emerged even just in our kind of last section here of the breakout time was the image, I think, of a river. A couple of us told stories of rivers and how rivers had such an impact on our diving into activism on behalf of the climate. And Betsy, you started us off with a story about the river burning. And if we link that with the toxic stories of our past, there's so much rich visual and image-driven piece for that story that helps us say that was a toxic story. That was a toxic time, and the life of that river that had been so beautiful and has been in some ways reclaimed, it was lacking, it was longing for something greater. And then we think about the possibility of a clean river that we are able to go to even now today. I live right near Whatcom Falls Park, and many days that creek runs quite clear and beautiful and fresh, and it just inspires me to see creation in possibly a good way, a reclaimed way. I was over at the fish pond with my son a few days ago, and I love the days when I can see all the way to the bottom of the fish pond, because on these bright fall days, you can start to see that clarity in the water. And I wonder, again, if we can hold the toxic story of the burning river alongside the possibility of clear, clean water, and use that as what might drive us towards collective action together. That we might be the people who help create the spaces where those clean waters can be seen by our children, by our loved ones, by our community, and that can be a symbol of hope. We all are embarking on this river together right now. We are swimming in it together. And at times it feels like it is quite toxic and the struggle is quite deep. But I hope that these moments like what we have right now, they might actually provide us with something of that sweet, deep, clear water, like if you were to find an eddy in the river and be able to sit and float with each other and rest, so that then you can continue on in this journey. I hope that you feel inspired by the stories that you've heard tonight. I hope that you feel like they have lit up a part of you in your own way and own tradition and in your own unique, particular way that you're called to act in the world. I hope that these stories have given you a sense of renewed hope, because they've done that for me. The colleagues and the folks who've spoken up here, they are inspiring their own faith communities, and they are calling all of us towards that action to make the river cleaner, to lead into a new part of the story that we get to tell together. And that's what I kind of want to say in closing. I think we have a new story to tell together, and it's being done in this space. We see it rising up in the national conversation around anti-racism, around honoring our nation's values and hopes for a place where we can all belong and all have a place to contribute. That there's possibility for us to actually write something new together and not be stuck where we have been in what is toxic. I want to close with a reading from one of my favorite poets, who writes poems and prayers about the earth and our connection with it and the divine, John O'Donohue. And the poem is In Praise of the Earth. And I'll say that as my closing word. So thank you for your time this evening, and thank you for your contributions, everyone. In praise of the earth. Let us bless the imagination of the earth that knew early the patience to harness the mind of time, waited for the seas to warm, ready to welcome the emergence of things dreaming of voyaging among the stillness of land. And how light knew to nurse the growth until the face of the earth brightened beneath a vision of color. When the ages of ice came and sealed the earth inside an endless coma of cold, the heart of the earth held hope, storing fragments of memory, ready for the return of the sun. Let us thank the earth that offers ground for home and holds our feet firm, to walk in space open to infinite galaxies. Let us salute the silence and certainty of mountains, their sublime stillness, their dream-filled hearts. The wonder of a garden, trusting the warmth of spring until its black infinity of cells becomes charged with dream. Then the silent, slow nurture of the seed's self, coaxing it to trust the act of death. The humility of the earth that transfigures all that has fallen of outlived growth. The kindness of the earth, opening to receive our worn forms in final stillness. Let us ask forgiveness of the earth for all our sins against her, for our violence and poisonings of her beauty. Let us remember within us the ancient clay, holding the memory of seasons, the passion of the wind, the fluency of water, the warmth of fire, the quiver touch of the sun, and shadowed sureness of the moon. That we may awaken to live to the full the dream of the earth, who chose us to emerge and incarnate its hidden night in mind, spirit, and light. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Seth. It was beautiful. So we've come to the end of our time together, and I just want to thank everyone who participated tonight, the speakers, and the people who helped make this happen, our little events committee, our mighty little events committee, and Steve Hansen, and everyone here for coming together and sharing this space tonight.
Yes, it was a pleasure spending the evening with you all. You're very inspirational.
Yes, it was.
Thank you so much for coming.
All right, thank you.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Did you want to mention tomorrow night?
Oh, yeah. Tomorrow night, you get another opportunity. We're going to be sponsoring another event. This time, David Roberts is our moderator, and he's going to be leading us in a moderated discussion of the movie 2040, which if you haven't seen it yet, you definitely should. It'll lift your spirits and it'll make you feel hopeful. It's really a great movie.